They told you taxes build roads and schools. They said it's your duty, the price you pay for civilization. But that's not the real story. The truth is far older, far darker, and far more profitable. Taxes don't just fund government, they fund control. The American tax system wasn't designed to make society fair. It was designed to make the empire last. In the beginning, America didn't even have an income tax. For most of its early history, the government survived on tariffs, land sales, and excise duties. The idea that citizens should pay a portion of their income to the government was unthinkable, a violation of the very freedom the country claimed to be built on. Then came war. The first U.S. income tax was born during the Civil War in 1861, not for public good, but to finance the Union Army. It was meant to be temporary, a patriotic contribution to victory, and when the war ended, it was repealed. But once a government learns it can tax income, it never forgets. Half a century later, in 1913, the 16th Amendment was ratified, legalizing the federal income tax permanently. That same year, another institution was born, the Federal Reserve. That wasn't a coincidence, it was a partnership. The income tax gave the government a guaranteed stream of money. The Federal Reserve gave it a printing press. Together, they built the foundation for a system that could fund war, debt, and expansion without restraint. Before 1913, government spending was limited by what it could collect. After 1913, it was limited only by what people were willing to believe. The new machine worked perfectly. The Fed could print money to finance government debt, and the IRS could collect taxes to pay the interest. The rich could lend to the government through bonds, and the poor would pay them back through taxes and inflation. It wasn't robbery, it was genius. From that moment on, America discovered the secret of modern empire. You don't need to conquer people when you can tax them. World War I made the system permanent. The government borrowed massively to fund the war, then used income taxes to pay off the debt. When the war ended, the debt didn't. Neither did the tax. By the 1940s, during World War II, the system had evolved into something even more powerful. With millions of men fighting overseas, the U.S. government needed money faster than ever. So it introduced withholding, taxes taken directly from paychecks before workers even saw their wages. It was marketed as patriotic duty, pay as you earn. But it was something else entirely. It was psychological warfare. Once people got used to never seeing their full income, they stopped questioning how much was taken. The modern tax state was born. From that moment, citizens no longer worked for themselves first. They worked for the system. A portion of every paycheck went directly to the machine, automatically, invisibly, and forever. But the brilliance of the system wasn't in what it took. It was in what it allowed. With guaranteed tax income, the U.S. government could borrow endlessly. Every war, every bailout, every subsidy was funded not by savings, but by future taxes. And every time the government borrowed, the Federal Reserve printed the money to cover it. The debt grew, the dollar weakened, inflation rose. But as long as people kept paying taxes, the illusion held. That's the real purpose of taxes. Not to fund spending, but to give the system credibility. When you pay taxes, you validate the currency. You confirm that the paper in your wallet, or the digits in your bank account, have value, because the most powerful entity on earth demands it in payment. The IRS isn't just a collection agency. It's an enforcement arm for the dollar itself. That's why the U.S. doesn't mind printing trillions, because the world pays taxes in dollars too. After World War II, the United States exported its tax system globally. The Bretton Woods Agreement made the dollar the world's reserve currency. Every nation needed dollars to trade, which meant every nation became indirectly a taxpayer to the American empire. Oil was priced in dollars. Loans were issued in dollars. And if a country couldn't pay, the IMF, backed by the U.S., would step in with assistance. It wasn't charity, it was tribute. Taxes became the lifeblood of empire, not through soldiers, but through spreadsheets. And the genius of it all is how invisible it became. When you pay your taxes, you think you're funding your country. You're not. You're funding its debt. Interest payments to bondholders, subsidies to corporations, military bases you'll never see. You're not paying for the future. You're paying for the past. Every April, millions of Americans file their taxes believing they're contributing to something noble. But over half of all tax revenue goes to mandatory spending, Social Security, Medicare, and debt interest. Most of what's left goes to defense, roads and schools. A fraction. Taxes don't fund prosperity, they fund perpetuity. The empire discovered a way to make its citizens willingly finance their own servitude, and call it freedom. The system is self-sustaining. The more debt the government issues, the more taxes it collects to pay the interest. The more money it prints, the more inflation eats your savings. And when inflation rises, you work harder, earn more, and move into a higher tax bracket. That's the hidden trick. Inflation silently pushes you into paying more, even if your real income doesn't rise. It's called bracket creep. It's how governments grow without raising rates. And through it all, the wealthy stay ahead. Because the tax code isn't written to punish them, it's written to protect them. When income tax was first introduced, it targeted the top 1%. Today, the top earners have armies of lawyers and accountants to shelter their wealth. They store assets offshore, shift profits through shell companies, and borrow against their own holdings instead of selling them, avoiding income tax entirely. Meanwhile, the middle class pays first and last, taxed on income, taxed on consumption, taxed on savings, taxed on death. And yet, the genius of the system is that people defend it because they think taxes are patriotic. They think paying means belonging. But patriotism is the cheapest currency an empire can mint. The real reason the system endures is because it's global. America's tax machine doesn't stop at its borders. Through laws like FATCA, the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, the U.S. can track and tax its citizens anywhere on Earth. No other nation does this. If you're American, your income belongs to Washington, no matter where you live. And every foreign bank is forced to comply, to report, to monitor, to submit to the empire's reach, because if they don't, they're cut off from the dollar system. That's how taxation became weaponized. It's not about collecting money anymore. It's about collecting data, compliance, and control. Because whoever tracks your income tracks your identity. The IRS doesn't just know what you earn. It knows how you live. It knows where your money goes, what you buy, who you work for, who you donate to. It knows when you're late, when you're desperate, when you're hiding. That's not finance, that's surveillance. And the next evolution is already here. As money becomes digital, as cash fades and every transaction becomes traceable, the tax system won't need to ask anymore. It will know in real time. That's not the future, that's the matrix. And in part 2, that matrix expands from citizens to nations, from income to identity, from taxation to total control. Because when the entire world owes money to the same empire, collecting taxes isn't about funding government anymore. It's about owning the planet. After World War II, America realized something extraordinary. It didn't need to conquer countries to control them. It only needed to control their money. And the instrument of that control wasn't an army. It was the tax system. The US dollar became the world's reserve currency, backed not by gold, but by confidence. Every nation needed dollars to trade. Every corporation needed dollars to borrow. Every central bank held dollars in reserve. And once the world ran on dollars, it quietly became part of the US tax base, not in law, but in leverage. That's how the tax matrix began. An empire built not on occupation, but obligation. The United States designed a system where money flows through American banks, clears through American servers, and reports to American agencies. Even when two foreign nations trade, their payments often pass through New York, and every dollar that passes through is visible, traceable, taxable, or sanctionable. This was never about revenue, it was about reach. In 1970, the Bank Secrecy Act gave the U.S. government the power to demand financial reporting from banks. In 2001, after 9/11, the Patriot Act expanded that power globally under the name of counterterrorism. Every transaction became a data point, every transfer a potential threat. What started as taxation evolved into total financial surveillance. Then came FATCA, the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act of 2010. It forced every bank on earth to report American citizens' accounts directly to the IRS. If they refused, they'd be cut off from the dollar system. That meant no access to global markets, no clearing, no liquidity. So they all complied. With one law, America turned every foreign bank into an unpaid IRS agent. For ordinary citizens, FATCA meant they could be taxed by the U.S. no matter where they lived. For corporations and governments, it sent a message. The United States doesn't just tax income, it taxes influence. Because taxes aren't about money, they're about obedience. If you can track a person's income, you can track their choices. If you can track a nation's income, you can steer its economy. When you control the rails through which money moves, you don't need to tell people what to do. The code enforces it for you. That's how the U.S. turned taxation into geopolitics. Sanctions became the new form of war. Invisible, bloodless, devastating. Freeze a bank's access to SWIFT, block its transactions. Cut a country off from the dollar network and its economy collapses without a single missile fired. The IRS, the Treasury, and the Federal Reserve are not just domestic institutions anymore. Together, they form the administrative core of a financial empire. The IRS monitors flows. The Treasury enforces compliance. The Fed prints the global lifeblood. Every dollar of global debt becomes a silent tribute to that empire. And when nations complain, the U.S. offers aid, loans through the World Bank or the IMF, both headquartered in Washington, both structured so that repayment happens in dollars. Those repayments are funded by taxes, not American taxes, but local taxes collected from citizens around the world. In the modern world, even sovereignty is taxable. But the empire's reach doesn't stop with countries. It extends into every digital wallet, every app, every fintech platform. With the rise of cashless payment systems, taxation is merging with surveillance. Every purchase leaves a footprint. Every footprint can be measured, modeled, and eventually monetized. The IRS doesn't need to ask what you earned. Your data already tells them. And when central bank digital currencies arrive, the process will be complete. Imagine a future where your digital dollars are issued directly by the Federal Reserve. Your salary, your taxes, your spending, all on one programmable ledger. No more filing returns, no more privacy. Your tax rate will adjust automatically based on income, consumption, or even carbon emissions. Deductions will appear or vanish depending on your behavior. Miss a payment? The system corrects it instantly. No appeals, no delay. It will be sold as convenience, as efficiency, as progress. But underneath, it's the same old design, the conversion of freedom into compliance. Because once the government doesn't need your permission to tax, taxation becomes permanent. And that's the genius of the tax matrix. It convinces you that submission is service, that deduction is duty, that the system is moral. You file your return each year thinking you're funding roads, schools, defense. You're not. You're validating control. Every tax payment confirms that the dollar still rules. Every digital transaction confirms that the system still works. That's why deficits don't matter. That's why debt keeps growing. That's why the government never worries about running out of money. Because you'll always keep paying in the only currency that really exists, trust. When trust breaks, the whole thing falls apart. But they've thought of that too. They manage trust the same way they manage taxes, with fear. Fear of audits, fear of penalties, fear of exclusion. The tax matrix doesn't need walls. It has paperwork. It doesn't need soldiers. It has compliance officers. It doesn't need belief. It has enforcement. And if the empire ever faces resistance, it won't send troops. It'll send letters, sanctions, and data requests. That's how you rule a digital world, through taxation of every transaction, visible and invisible. For the first time in history, the empire doesn't need to expand outward. The world has already moved inside it. Because every time you earn, spend, or save in dollars, you're paying a quiet tribute to the system that prints them. Every paycheck, every trade, every investment acknowledges the same center of gravity. You're not just a taxpayer in your country. You're a taxpayer in an empire. And here's the final irony. Most people think taxes are the price of freedom. In truth, they're the rent we pay to live inside a financial system we never chose. It's not theft, it's structure. An architecture so vast, so old, so efficient, that we mistake it for nature. But the moment you see it, it stops being invisible. Because control only works when it feels normal. And the day people realize that taxation was never about money, that it was always about power, that's the day the matrix begins to crack. Until then, the system will keep running, the same way it always has. Not through conquest or consent, but through compliance. You don't fund the empire. You are the empire.